Welcome everyone to the second discussion panel of the MIT Tech Idea 2022. My name is Mamoun Toukan. I serve as the MIT as a board member at the MIT Arab Alumni Association. I'm also the director of business development at Arab Transit, co-founder of ArcFlow, a B2B platform that aims to digitize the supply chain or supply chain processes. I do hold a master's degree in supply chain management from MIT. It gives me great pleasure to moderate this session titled Sustainable Supply Chains, a topic that presents a lot of opportunities and challenges due to the sheer complexities that exist in the networks. And I do hope by the end of this panel, we highlight the importance of why looking at supply chains when assessing or adopting sustainability initiatives and strategies are crucial to making them work. So this panel will be structured into three parts. First, we'll get to hear from each panelist about their work, their experiences. We'll follow it up with moderator questions, just to open it up for discussions. And finally, we conclude with the audience Q&A. So to participate in the Q&A section, please just type your questions in the comments tab on the side. There will be no voice participation by the audience. Before hearing from the experts, I'd just like to give a quick high-level intro on supply chains and how they link to sustainability. So supply chains are what brings product services from their initial state of raw materials to the end customers, right? It involves transportation, transporting and transforming raw materials into parts and ultimately into finished products, then to transporting and distributing them to the end user, and finally, waste or disposing of them. So this long chain or multiple chain involves a network of entities, which includes producers, vendors, warehouses, transporters, distributors, retailers, and so forth. So you can just imagine the complexity that exists within it. And then a company adopting sustainability initiatives, say green, going green, might have total control over their working conditions, their facilities and manufacturing techniques and people, but then they might not own every aspect of the chain. So there's a quote by a McKinsey report in 2016 that stated the typical consumer company's supply chain creates far greater social and environmental costs than its own operations, accounting for more than 80% of greenhouse gas emissions and more than 90% of impact on air, land, water, biodiversity, and geographical and geological resources. And recent history has shown embarrassing moments for global companies in the likes of like Apple, Nike, HP, Adidas, and others that have suffered mishaps because of practices that occurred in their suppliers' networks. And then, those examples like included bad factory working conditions, pollution, dumping of toxins. Others might not have been caused directly, by the direct supplier, but like the supplier's supplier. Other issues also occurred downstream. So you have, towards the end consumer and ultimately the disposal of the products as well. And besides of focusing on sustainability to ensure brand equity, companies also need to there's another reason, a second type of risk. So sustainability impacts and interferes with the company's supply chain in another way. So sustainability can impact the supply getting into the company. So let's consider like a grain manufacturer being hit by a drought, right? So like University Unilever was hit a few years back with an impact of drought on declining agricultural productivity. So the topic is vast and we'll barely be scratching the surface, but through the panel's experiences, we'll be able maybe to form a somewhat holistic and international view of where the planet stands or where businesses stand and the future trends of achieving sustainable supply chains. So it gives me great honor to introduce these three exceptional experts. Dr. Josue Valencias Martinez, the director of the MIT Sustainable Supply Chain Lab, director of MIT Low Income Firms Transformation Lab, lecturer at the Center of Transportation at MIT. Dr. Josue has over 10 years of experience conducting applied research on logistics sustainability and small firms in emerging markets. He has a variety of published academic, business-oriented articles and book chapters. I've also had the privilege of being taught by Josue at MIT in 2018 for this very topic. Our next speaker is Mr. Wolfgang Lemarcher, operating partner at Anchor Group. Wolfgang was a former head of supply chain and transport industries at the director at the World Economic Forum, president and CEO of Emeritus of GeoPost Intercontinental, on the advisory board of the Logistics Supply Chain Management Society, ambassador of the European Freight and Logistics Forum, and a founding member of the think tank Logistique Visienne and NEXST. Wolfgang also serves as a board member, executive advisor, and business angel for a number of startups and associations. And we have Miss Andrea Wilm, who is a senior program manager at APM Terminals decarbonization team and an industrial PhD researcher. Andrea holds a master's degree from Copenhagen Business School and joined Maersk in 2015 after 4 years in Quartz Management Consulting, which is Bain & Company today. She joined APM Terminals as a senior transformation partner in August of 2020, where she has supported the wider transformation agenda of APM Terminals. Andrea has decided to deepen her knowledge around the essential topic of decarbonization, starting in APMT's decarbonization office in 2022. She has received a grant from the Innovation Fund in Denmark to embark on the industrial PhD with a focus on APMT's decarbonization journey. And we're very excited to hear about that. On behalf of the MIT Arab Alumni Association and the Tech Arabia team, I'd like to thank our speakers for being here today. And I'd like to give each of you a 5-minute intro to introduce yourselves. And let's start with Dr. Josue to enlighten us with supply chain sustainability and your areas of research. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Mamoun, for the generous introduction. It's really a great pleasure also to see you doing all great things, and still remember having you in the class of Sustainable Supply Chain Management here at MIT. So as you said already, I'm a research scientist at MIT, and I've been working on the topic of logistics sustainability for the last 10 years. My role, more than just working on helping companies account for the environmental impacts, in their transportation or logistics activities, it's been more how to put them, these considerations in the decisions, in the logistics and supply chain management decisions. So working on this for many years, it has taken time, because at the beginning, many of the first steps were trying to convince companies to start measuring, Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3 emissions, following the greenhouse gas protocol. Many of them actually was like a strong boom, I would say, probably 5 years ago, establishing also their carbon reduction targets, and a very ambitious one for the next 10, 20, 30 years. But what I've seen now is that once they did that exercise some years ago, it comes now to the stage in which the first steps to do some reductions were already in place. Now is how we are going to establish a new strategy to really achieve those reductions. And it seems not that simple anymore, because many of the estimations that were conducted in the past were not with the sufficient level of detail, in my view. And this is part of the research we've been conducting for the last years, trying to improve the accuracy of the estimations in a way that is not just matching where the companies identify their hotspots in their supply chain, but to also identify the levers. What are those drivers that can increase or decrease those emissions? And this is slightly different, right? Usually when I teach this, I give the example of having problems with the liver, for instance. That hopefully nobody in the audience is having those problems. But if you have a problem with the liver, one solution could be, let's just focus on a liver transplant, right? And for me, it looks like that also when we have the ambition of saying in 5-10 years we are going to just move to, let's say, renewable energies, electric vehicles, change the configuration, the network, the sourcing. So this is a goal that definitely is going to help. But we can do things also, in the short term. In the example of the liver, instead of saying I'm going to just change the liver, maybe you can stop drinking that much. Maybe you can drink more water. Maybe you can do exercises. So there are things related to certain activities in the companies and the supply chain that are tailored to drive those reductions, but at this stage are very unknown, or the way that they are modeled are too simplistic in my view. And this is what being studied, right? Helping companies to really capture what are those specificities in their operations that are driving their environmental impact in their supply chain, and how they can account this information in decisions such as, routing and sequencing, the selection of the optimal fleet composition, looking at inventory management decisions, how those replenishment strategies are moving different layers in the upstream of the supply chain, focusing also how they can involve consumers into these decisions by also transparently inform what are the environmental impacts of their decisions, focusing on consumers as well as other clients in the supply chain. And also decisions in demand forecasting. What are, for instance, the challenges of having, inaccuracies in the forecast, and how does that translate also in increasing the carbon emissions in the supply chain? So many of those things are still, I believe, in the initial steps. And while we see companies in the strategic level really working on this very heavily, to the best of my knowledge, this is still not translated into the day-to-day decision process that they have. At this stage, nor planners actually can make a decision of a replenishment strategy, for instance, to say whether I change the frequency or not, and I can understand what is the environmental impact of those decisions. Same with demand planning, same with procurement, or same with also transportation and other activities. So we believe now we are living the kickoff, the start of something that seems very ambitious. And I'm very happy to be participating in this panel. This is probably the third panel done in the year in discussions around these topics that seem very relevant. And I take this opportunity to try to encourage companies to really start working more in the accuracy, as well as matching this with their processes and the decisions in the supply chain. So we have plenty of examples, but I'd rather also hear from my colleagues, Mamoun, to also see what are their point of view in all these topics.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the intro. And with 2020, 2021 being the years of supply chain management being at the forefront, I feel with sustainability it'll still be on the forefront. Moving on to Wolfgang, can you please give us your intro and views on the topic?
Yeah, first, thank you very much, and it's a real pleasure. It's an honor to be here, to speak here, and it's one of my, I think, most passionate area. Although I believe we can do a lot more in this space. So, what I would like to start with is my view on what sustainability is, because we very often isolate sustainability in the area of environmental, climate, and more or less that's it. But for me, it is much more. It is also the economical part. If we separate the environmental part from the economical part, we will not get there. There is a big, let's say, area for misunderstanding and unnecessary debate if we don't understand that sustainability should increase my profitability, should give me more revenue. That's what I always believed, and I practiced it as much as I could in the corporate environment. We can talk about that as well. But then there is a third dimension, which is the social dimension. We are doing this all for us. This is for the well-being. This is for safety. That's also an area. And what I now have included in that concept of three dimensions, which some call triple E, other triple bottom line or whatever, is in fact the regulatory part, because regulation is important when it comes to sustainability. And I will come to that. And if we don't have companies that make profit, that protect the environment they depend on, that respect their people, and that get from the regulator the support for their courageous moves, then we will not get there, and we will have the wrong debate. So that's my first point. My second point is that I'm very happy that sustainability finally got traction. I'm at a stage of experience where I've seen a lot. The early beginnings, the struggles, the quick wins, the early successes, and I haven't seen yet the mainstream. But what I have seen is a lot of good developments recently. Where did it come from? I don't know. Is it the new generations? Is it the awareness that climate change is a reality, and that our world get extremely toxic and difficult and causes a lot of challenges to us? So when I just take two examples, I see a lot in the area of engines. So we have never had so much talk about biodiesel powered engines, hydrogen powered engines, the battery revolution, etc., etc. So the whole engine part is moving. Then there is a lot where Josue touched upon, which is linked to digitalization. So route optimization, load optimization, reducing of empty miles, etc. So if we cannot make the machines clean, then at least make them more efficient. But that's of course only an interim solution. Like we have other interim solutions, for example, in shipping, going to another area, where we have LNG. LNG reduces, for example, the carbon footprint maybe by 15, 18%, but it's better than nothing, right? So it's not my dream, but it's better than nothing. And if we say, and I congratulate, of course, Maersk for their decision on the methanol, 11, 12 methanol ships, but the issue is that we don't have enough green methanol, right? So, and that brings me to the next point, which is if we want to be efficient, for example, in decarbonization, we need to look at multiple value chains and harmonize them. In fact, the example with methanol shows that one of the supply chains is not working. The green fuel supply chain needs to ramp up. Then we have the shipping supply chain, and the shipbuilders, they build green ships, and the engine manufacturers build green engines. But then if I'm a ship operator, what do I do? Do I buy an engine which I continue to power by heavy fuel oil, right? So that's another message of mine. We need to think about clusters. And then there is a difference between, let's say, a company that decarbonizes or practices sustainability locally, or a company that operates globally. Because you have to deal with a lot of different jurisdictions, with a lot of different stages. Let's take e-waste. You cannot move e-waste simply across certain borders, right? So that's where the regulatory bit comes in. And maybe a final one, when we reduce it to, let's say, the non-economical part, I'm more and more a believer in circular economy thinking. So building ships from recycled materials that can be recycled, designing products in a modular way that can be upgraded, engines that can be upgraded, trucks that can be upgraded. I believe in flexibility. So we will not have a world that is homogeneous, but we need solutions that work in Africa and in Europe and in the United States. So these are my let's say 5 cents to contribute to the discussion.
Great, excellent. Andrea, could you please share your experience and also introduce us to APMT's net zero commitment?
Yes, no, definitely. And I think Wolfgang actually puts a very good bridge into the presentation that I had. And probably before jumping into our commitments, I don't know if it's shared, the presentation. I can see it.
Molly, can you please bring it up?
Yes. So I just wanted to use 30 seconds to introduce you to APM terminals, because indeed most people think about us as Maersk. So if you go to the first slide. On the left, I'll give you some numbers, and on the right, you tell me what those numbers are. So you can think about them while I introduce the first one. So APM terminals, which is part of the APM Møller-Maersk group, or Maersk, as most of you know it. We are the terminal operating part of the bigger shipping line. We currently have 75 terminals across the world. Approximately, 40 of them we operate, so we have the operational control. We are currently existing in 42 different countries, and we are around 22,000 people that works for APM Terminal specifically. Now, I know that the participants cannot answer, but if you can put in the chat, what do you think these numbers are? So what is 0.5 million, less than 2%, and approximately 10,000? And I'm not sure I can see the chat, so maybe Mahmoud, you can tell me if there's any takers to that little quiz.
Will do.
I'm going to use the 6-second rule since you've given me a tight deadline.
So winner gets free food. So 0.5 million customers, 0.5 sustainable.
Okay, so let me give them to you. So 0.5 million is the ton of CO2 equivalent that we emitted in our baseline year, which is 2020. So as we have started to look at our decarbonization, we're using the 2020. And if you look at 0.5, and especially if you connect it to the next one, which is less than 2%, so our carbon footprint as APM terminals across the 75, or actually a bit fewer terminals, but across the operating ones, it's less than 2%. It's actually less than 1.5% of the overall Maersk's emission. So by far the biggest problem in the Maersk group are the vessels. We are actually teeny tiny in the bigger scheme of things. And to put 0.5 million tons in perspective, that's roughly a small/medium-sized European city. Now, the 10,000 is the interesting one because that's the number of our container handling equipment, so our assets, over which this footprint is spread across. And that brings me to the next slide and really to our challenge, because for us, it's not the size of our emission that we need to tackle, it's the fragmentation of our footprint. So the dots that you see are indicative where we have big emissions. And for sure, we have a few terminals that we could deal with first because they are our biggest emitters. But we basically have emissions everywhere, tied into so many different types of machines in so many different local contexts, exactly as you mentioned, Wolfgang. Every country we operate in has a unique set of machines and a unique set of local contexts, both opportunities and risks. So this is really the challenge that we as a terminal operator and as APMT are facing. And if we move to the next slide, so I don't think you can actually see the graph, or at least I can see it. But basically what it shows is we want to go from the 500,000 to 0 before 2040. And we have a milestone by 2030, we want to have reduced by 70%. And to this date, at least what we know, this is the most ambitious in the terminal operating industry. And we're also following the Maersk trajectory. So the overall group has said we're going to be net zero by 2040. And if you move on to the next slide, I'm hoping that you can actually, yeah, perfect. This one is important to see. So this is a little bit around how are we going to do this? And the different hexagons that you see are what we talk about as our levers. So for us to decarbonize a terminal, we need the 3 hexagons to the left. We need to look into our energy optimization and reduce how we spend our energy. Our strategy, based on our type of equipment, is really electrify. to ensure that that electricity is green. So the first three from the left are really what we talk about as essential. We need to do this everywhere. Then as you move towards the right, these are more context specific. So in some location now, I'm working with Egypt, where we can easily, well, we can electrify the equipment. That's not the challenge. But the grid is not green in Egypt, and we can't rely on that being green for certain before we need to have our targets. So then we're looking at on-site renewables. Very similar case in Aqaba, actually in Jordan, where solar is going to be a big part to ensure that electricity. While on the other hand, in Europe, we have no problems at this point getting green electricity, but we have some type of equipment that are much more difficult to electrify. So then we need to look at something else. And then ultimately, we need to create value for our customers. And for us, customers are both the Apples and the Nikes of the world. It's the shipping lines, so the Maersk, CMA, MSC of the world. And also, we look at the port authorities and the local governments as a type of customer, because they are really the ones that are the basis for our business model. They are the ones who are entrusting their strategic infrastructure for us to operate. And connected to that is something that we're looking into. So we have a lot of terminals we call brownfield. They're already there, and we need to find a solution to make them green. But we're also building new terminals, so we talk about them as greenfields. And how can we do it right from the beginning? So that is also a separate work stream. And then the last work stream is basically everything beyond our own scope 1 and 2. So how can we help the shipping line? How can we make sure that we provide green shore power so that they can turn off their engine? How can we increase their turnaround time? Can batteries help them in some way? So this is basically our different levers, and tied into all of this is our end-to-end decarbonization roadmaps. And this is where I spend most of my time. So together with our terminals, working on creating their plan. How are we going to solve this challenge for Egypt, for Gothenburg, where I'm sitting today, for Jordan? And that also brings me to the last slide, mindful that I'm probably out of time, but also just to put myself in perspective, because I'm not yet an expert, as you introduced me to. I'm a learner as an industrial PhD student, and my PhD is very much aligned to the strategy and what I just presented. Basically looking at how can we build and scale these end-to-end roadmaps, because we need to build them very fast. And how can we actually accelerate the operationalization of it? So how can we do pilots faster and make sure that the technology is maturing? And the last one, also super important, is how do we prepare our organization for this? We see engagement is going through the roof as soon as we start talking about decarb, but what about the skills, and what about the actual impact on our day-to-day operations? So that is the challenge that we as a team and myself, I'm spending the next 3 years on.
Yeah, no, that is quite interesting and a big of a challenge. My question to you, just to kick off discussion, what do you think was the motive behind having APMT, or maybe the Maersk Group as well, going into or doing the net zero commitment? Was it social pressure? Was it government? Or is it profitability?
So I will be careful speaking about Maersk, since I am not part of that team, though I would say all of the above. So at APM Terminals, we normally follow our big brother or sister, which is Maersk. In this instance, we were actually aligned almost slightly ahead of them. And the reason is because we've seen our customers, which are the shipping lines, asking. We've seen the H&Ms asking for it. We've also seen the possibility of a regulatory risk. So if you talk about a carrot now, where for a short period of time, this can be a differentiating factor for us, very soon is probably going to be a license to operate. If we look at what's happening in LA, for example, we hear similar rumors around the world. That's pretty soon. This is going to be, you need to have this to operate. And I think I wouldn't talk about it as a commercial profit-making machine as such, but it's definitely something to say, how can we safeguard ourselves? If fuel is going through the roof in terms of prices, can we turn to other sources? And if we do see a big exposure, if the carbon tax actually becomes a reality, how can we prepare ourselves to that? So I would say all of them above.
Okay. And it's definitely interesting, because the port is at one part of the supply chain that you are taking that initiative to decarbonize, the terminals, and like you say, it seems that this is something that
I would like.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry if I interrupted. I wouldn't call us as one part of the supply chain, and maybe I'm biased there. I would almost call us the heartbeat of the supply chain, because we're the one connecting, land and sea. We're the one getting containers in one gate, pushing them out through the water, and then taking them back and pushing them out in the community. So, but maybe I'm biased.
No, that's an interesting way of putting it. And for Josue and Wolfgang, what are your thoughts on why our company taking such initiatives and looking at their supply chains to implement sustainability aspects, and not only for green but also social enterprise, social what's it called? Social initiatives, I would say. Right. Josue, you like to lead on this?
Sure. No, I believe this is fascinating. I believe there were already plenty of things that are quite relevant, and also Wolfgang did say, and also Andrea. I believe all of the above is actually the right answer. There are plenty of risks. I believe, of course, certain companies operating in Europe already are facing the consequences of having strong regulations for probably a decade, where the carbon tax is entirely reality and is being operated with this in the market as well. But we know also that, yesterday I was having actually the last session of my class, and students were presenting different projects, and I asked them to do some comparisons between companies that were, let's say, a benchmark on sustainable supply chain strategies versus others that were just on the going. And for some people, actually, they were presenting, for instance, the case of Nike. Right, Nike saying like the benchmark versus other companies, and we were just thinking about it like probably 40 years ago when they were the first to be attacked by the sweatshops, and how actually that triggered entirely completely different behavior. And it was something that it was not necessarily triggered by consumer or by profit or cost minimization. Then suddenly an NGO decides to go after you, detecting all the different suppliers you have in your supply chain and finding some vulnerabilities, and then suddenly you need to do something about it because your brand positioning, your reputation matters a lot. So there are risks associated with that part, NGOs, other organizations, regulations, potential consumers that are going to care or not, and also opportunities to reduce cost, among many others. So all of these things are definitely, having some effect. And what for me is more surprising probably is that really the bump came just in the last 3, 4, 5 years. And it's really interesting. I was actually running a research brief at the center. So we have, as you probably remember, Mamoun, different corporate partners that are, top CPGs, logistics providers, companies, including, by the way, Maersk is one of those. But we have also other, P&G, we have Walmart. And I run a poll, as you said, starting the presentation. I said, well, do you have sustainability, let's say either sustainability goals, I'll say, or something related in your either mission, vision, or something in your corporate strategy that is explicitly written on sustainability? So 90% of them said yes. The next question was what type of sustainability, right? And there are plenty of discussions about now the ESG and different things that should be considered sustainable. But I was just mentioning mainly environmental, social, other. 90% went for environmental, 90%. Very, very few for social. And then the next one was, does your company have explicit carbon reduction targets for the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years? 85% of them. The other 5% wrote like, I didn't know. I don't know. So that shows now at this stage, it seems now everybody's concerned about these carbon emissions, and probably it's also related to what Andrea was describing with the increase in prices, also in fuel, like what is also the battles that are happening with the different sources. But yeah, for me, I believe the right path is exactly what I see also what Andrea presented, as well as what Maersk also has a vision, and many other companies have a roadmap in where the investment should be to really change entirely the grid of energy and the source, so that everything becomes greener, and therefore we are now talking about something sustainable. Now, sustainability is a trajectory. Right. I was just discussing about 40 years ago. 40 years ago, we were discussing about the ozone layer or pesticides or other things, and it started evolving, right, until climate change became more relevant, even more relevant, at least created more awareness for the rest of the people. But plenty of things now at this stage that are the solutions we are envisioning for the next 5-10 years are still, in the take of whether when we achieve that goal, we are going to be discussing other things that potentially are going to put at risk, again, societies. Like we are talking about the supply chain, which I believe you Wolfgang, discussed, like looking at the supply of the supply chain of these alternatives things, including also, the construction of vessels, and as well as other things. But we know that at this stage, looking for renewable energy, looking for the electric vehicle sources, they require other materials that are also scarce, that are coming from other sources that we don't know how long it's going to last, the operation of the network. So those things, need to be considered in a comprehensive, sustainable supply chain strategy. It's not that we should just look at this from a static perspective, but look at this as a trajectory perspective, being as a supply chain that is all the time monitoring vulnerabilities, risks, understanding, mapping the supply chain. What are the other entities that either belong to my control, or others that are in the scope 3 emissions, upstream, downstream, and trying to build something that will be more in tune with what's going to potentially happen in the next years. So for me, I believe that's probably something that is happening now, aligned with all the disruptions that it seems a never-ending story. I still believe the COVID is not over yet, even though here in Boston it seems it is. But I know that other places is not, and things are coming back in waves. But I believe this is the right path. I will also still emphasize the importance of converting those strategies into something that decision makers in the day-to-day activities can also see and observe and make decisions upon. Because at this stage it seems really apart, focusing still on meeting the business goals, minimizing costs, still entirely unaware how those decisions are really affecting their sustainability goals. And I believe this is also a great opportunity for companies to approach the problem with a very comprehensive approach.
Excellent. And Wolfgang, and might I also add, what other factors do you think would accelerate such initiatives of, let's say, sustainability within the supply chain?
Yeah, I think this is a very big question, because it is definitely not one thing. Because our world is diverse, fragmented, getting more fragmented, more decoupled. So you have a lot of things to think about. First, I would like to build on the previous question, because that's very relevant. As a former CEO, I'm trained on risk management, but risk management in 2 dimensions. I have to make sure that current risk threats, I call them threats, are mitigated and thought of. But more importantly, I have to make sure that future opportunities are captured. And that's why I also said that I see sustainability as a major opportunity. And then that's where it starts. I think that we need a massive campaign to show that sustainability is a real trend. And this not probably in Europe, because there we come into the differences in the world. So Europe, California, these are the countries or the areas where it's really a common topic. common sense to be sustainable to a large extent. There is always other schools. So, but we need to make clear that this is also for our well-being, all for our well-being, and it's a lot of things that can happen, and they have been mentioned. So that there is the risk of a carbon price. For me, it's not a risk. It's an enormous opportunity, because the moment we have the carbon price right, a lot of alternative solutions become viable. When they become viable, they need to be built. The economy needs to be the fossil fuel powered economy needs to be rebuilt. This is a multi-trillion dollar opportunity. So, and we have to do it. We will reduce, and there's another thing, we will reduce external risks like floodings, storms, the whole thing which we are now seeing increasingly. I also think that now, so an area or a region which is less sustainability driven is Asia. So we need to help Asia to get on that train. And I may exclude China. China is extremely sustainability driven. No choice. If they had continued 10 years ago, 15 years ago on the track they were, it would have been a terrible result for the health and the well-being of the Chinese. So but I think what I'm saying is we need an approach which is tailored to the culture, to the state of the different regions and countries. And that brings me to another point. If we really want to transform the economy into a much more sustainable economy, we have to find a way to stop the current fragmentation. We need to align across the world. We need to have common standards. To just take the ETS, the trading system, right? So if you have 5 or 10 or 12 of those, and there are multiples coming up, it will be very difficult for global players to deal with that. I'm less worried about the variety of fuels, just also to make that point, because we need all this variety. We need biofuels for short sea shipping. We need batteries for river shipping and maybe also short sea shipping. We need methanol, hydrogen, maybe ammonia, if we think we can handle that, maybe even nuclear for deep sea shipping. So we need variety. The next point when I hear myself talking, which comes to my mind, is we have to put much more research into the whole topic and get the right discussion going, and get a better understanding what it takes. We need a new breed of people. We need people who understand sustainability, who understand circularity, who can build circular products. There are very few experts that have the knowledge to advise companies how to get the toxic elements out of their products, where to start, where to continue, and which products to just drop, because you will never make them circular and sustainable. So for me, in summary, global alignment, an approach of diversity, education, that's where it starts, and probably a private sector that helps the public sector to find the right mechanisms to support them. And of course, we are then in carbon trading schemes, we are in carbon price, et cetera, et cetera. And then comes the whole financing, which was on the ATM slide, which is very important. I think we have to find ways to finance that. And I'm convinced personally that it's not a question of money. Sustainability is not a question of money. It's a question of knowledge and a question of willing. Because I have just worked on a project, decarbonization of the maritime industry, with a lot of interviews, and there is one question I almost always ask: all what you propose, is that possible? And everybody says it's possible, but it's not economically viable. So that's where we have to think about, and maybe think more collectively. It's maybe not only the education of an individual, it's the education of industries, and it's the education of the economy. Because when you look at, I mentioned the supply chain. So you have a fuel supply chain. If that doesn't work, it doesn't make sense to build dual fuel engines that run on the wrong fuel, and it makes it very hard for the operators to buy those ships. So the operation supply chain will also not work. But it's not only that cluster, it is also the competition and interdependency between this industry and other industry, right? We are, when we look at alternative fuels, it's not anymore the world we live. Nobody wants to have the fuel that the ocean carriers burn. But if we move to hydrogen, if we move to methanol, we are in frontal competition with other industries. Take only the biofuel, we become frontal competitors with the aviation industry. But hydrogen and the other ones are very important for other difficult to abate industries. So I think my point was always the same. We have to raise our knowledge, work together to spread that knowledge, and then create teams and coalitions. And I don't want to appear that I'm promoting too much Maersk, but Maersk is signing currently a lot of MOUs, including Egypt, right? To build an ecosystem of decarbonization, to secure that they have a pole position, and some would say keep the pole position in the maritime race. So what drives it, and what is in fact what we have to do to drive more, is to find the right enablers of decarbonization, and understand it as an opportunity, a strategic decision, a bet on a different future.
I know this is great, and you touch on very important points. One of them is basically raising awareness, and you need businesses or the private tech sector to put pressure on the public sector, but you also need the consumer to put pressure on the private businesses. Just before we jump into the audience Q&A, just a quick question for Josue on, your thoughts on raising awareness. From where you stand with being at the forefront of in education, lecturing, if you will. What's your views on that, and what are you doing on that, through MIT's CTL programs?
Well, this is a perfect time for me to also promote our courses, right? So I've been working for the last year on developing a new course in edX, which is Sustainable Supply Chain Management, the SCM 290X, and has a very strong emphasis on logistics and transportation emissions, mainly because, as probably my colleagues already know, this is the one that explains vast majority of emissions growth overall in the world. So we are covering different topics that also includes circular supply chains. All the circularity that you were mentioning, I believe, is also quite relevant, as well as also social and sustainable sourcing. So we have plenty of things that are going to be included there. That is quite cool. So we're going to launch it in the summer, so stay tuned. And in terms of the awareness, probably, Mamoun, you may recall one of the projects that we presented at that time. It's called the Green Button. Right, and that project in general deals with the issue of what is the green consumer. Who is that green consumer in terms of demographics? In terms of gender, level of education, level of income. Try to understand whether those demographics can explain whether a person is willing to make decisions at the purchase moment that are more environmentally friendly. And this is, of course, we are discussing still, in this case, the consumer side, the B2C. And we did this project to test, actually, with a variety of consumers. But our goal was to illustrate different ways to communicate the environmental impact. And what we did is to work with a Mexican retailer. What we did is during the home delivery process, we launched, a large-scale data collection process with almost 1,000 surveys that we conducted. And more or less what we did was to illustrate. We will go to a home delivery process in e-commerce, and we will question the consumer whether he or she will be willing to delay their home delivery, or will have been willing to delay their home delivery by a certain amount of days, given certain information. So at the beginning, we will just do it without any incentive. Then later we will ask, well, what if I give you, I don't know, some economic incentive? And some of them said yes, others said no, others said it depends. It depends means yes, just give me sufficient money. And then later we ask, what if I tell you that every day that you delay your delivery, you are actually reducing 50 kilograms of CO2, right? Or we will present that information in terms of the amount of trees that we will not be killing to offset that amount of CO2 that is emitted to the atmosphere. Or we will also illustrate with garbage, or we will illustrate with powering electricity. So we will show different indicators to a similar community. And what we discover is that plenty of the knowledge we've gathered for the last 20 years in green consumer behavior seems to have a strong bias, because we believe that by saying kilograms of CO2, people understand what we mean, right? What Wolfgang was describing with the global warming potential, what may happen in the floods and everything, is something that we are targeting to happen in the next 20, 50, 100 years. But if we actually say this is the amount of trees that I need to offset that amount of CO2, we are actually discovered that once we presented information like that, at the beginning of the willingness to wait, there were 70% of people willing to wait. When I presented that project to Professor Sheffi at the center, he said, this is what they say, right? But will they do it? So we managed to convince the company to implement this in 2 cities, right? Mexico City and Monterrey. And what we discovered is that, in fact, not all of them were willing to wait, but we found 52% of people that actually changed their purchase decision to delay the delivery for an average of 4 or 5 days more. And just by illustrating this is a way to just create awareness, because we show plenty of insights. Among those is that there is no difference in the level of education. Similar people actually tend to have the same decision if they are taught in understandable statements. Same also with the gender bias. Same also with the in terms of income. So in other words, we argue that in general people care if they are informed in understandable statements. Now, to get to that point, usually when I present these projects, companies get very excited and say, well, let's do it. There are plenty of challenges to solve. The first one is you are touching consumers or clients, which usually is the deal of commercial. And anybody that works in supply chain knows that commercial and logistics, they hate each other, right? It's the healthy tension that happens. Don't touch my customers, and you focus on just supplying whatever I tell you. Now, the other challenge is that this requires transparency, which is another thing. Meaning, if I'm going to allocate certain environmental impact to a specific delivery, I should be able to account for those environmental impacts in the whole supply chain and understand how, if given more time, I will be willing to actually reassign and readjust my supply chain to really deliver. And those things are not a simple exercises. It requires a lot of work. So again, I believe there is a huge opportunity that people are more aware, but it will be awesome to be able to include them also in part of the strategy. Like at this stage, it seems that the efforts are more into the regulations or more in the companies what they really can do, while actually there is a consumer-driven logistics sustainability lying there, just waiting for the companies to be able to communicate and make them part of this solution so that their decisions during the purchase moment or others are going to really help drive the reduction of emissions overall in the supply chain. So for those interested in this one, hopefully you can go and look also the Green Button project. I believe is quite interesting. But those will be my comments, Ramon. I'm sorry that I took a little bit long, but I thought it was an interesting project.
No, this is very interesting. And I do remember the Green Button project. Basically, you're gamifying the consumer to become more sustainable, right? And yeah, I look forward to this new edX sustainability course on sustainable supply chains. So we do have a few questions. The first 3 questions are for Andrea. So first one is from Rana Jamal. asking you, who owns the terminals you operate?
So that is a mix. So we have everything from 100% own, where we own and control everything, to what we call minority JVs. So which means that we have less than 50% share, and in between there, it's a lot of different variety. So we might have just below 50%, but we actually have operational control because we have a CEO, we have the MD, or they reversed, where we actually have more, but there's another managing director. So it's a broad spectrum. Where we're focusing our efforts on the decarbonization is where we have the operational control. So where we either have 100% or we have another JV partner, but we have the management team, so we can actually do what we need to do. But of course, we're also working with a lot of our local and global partners. So for example, in Jordan and in Egypt, we have government partners, and there we're aligning our strategies together with them and make sure that it makes sense for them as well as for us.
So there's a couple more questions on that topic, on, let's say, APM terminals. Let me just quickly skim through them. What are the plans towards integrating hydrogen within the shipping terminals? How do you see hydrogen changing the ports around EU and MENA region? And again, anyone can jump in. Just let me read through the other one from Bashar. He says, Andrea, do you feel there is a united mission and vision from all terminal operators and supply chain institutions to reach net zero objective? Or do you feel it has become a rat race to each their own? Each terminal or organization are working alone, attaining such difficult yet ambitious targets.
Well, that's a good question.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll quickly start with that one. So I think we can definitely do more to collaborate in the industry. And I think, to be honest, compared to probably many consumer companies, we're a little bit late, right? So we're very ambitious and things are moving very fast, but we are a little bit late in the game. So I will take that question as a good challenge. We can definitely collaborate more, and I know that we are planning to do some conferences to also involve our partners in this. I can quickly give you my perspective on the hydrogen, and then I will open it up to Wolfram. So hydrogen is no doubt going to be key for shipping. When it comes to terminal operation, we see electrification as the primary driver, with a few exemptions. So we have one specific type of machine that is very heavy, and we are not sure whether an electrified solution is going to be able to do the job or to reach the productivity that we need. So there we are looking into hydrogen fuel cells and other options. But the majority of the solution for us is going to be in electrification.
I go back to my original statement. I think we need to look into everything. For me, currently, methanol is the winner in the shipping industry. But ammonia would be the better solution, but ammonia has side effects. It's highly toxic. But we are very familiar with ammonia. We are producing ammonia since many years, probably 100 years. When it comes to hydrogen has a few challenges, and I don't want to talk about the challenges. For me, hydrogen will come into play with the fuel cell, but the fuel cell is about 10 years away. So that's a technology which is not available today, and needs maybe to be made future-proof in other industries before we go to shipping. What is happening in the ports, from my perspective, that ports become energy hubs. That's a very good thing, because also transportation of fuel is a big topic, because you might have a better solution, a lower emitter, but if it's not available and you have to transport it over the ocean, And if you look at the number, how much of shipping is in fact energy shipping, what we ship across the seas, then maybe you prefer to use a dirtier fuel there. But what the ports are doing, they start now, and this recently, last 1 to 3 years, to prepare for this energy transition and the next generation of ships. Whether it's hydrogen, yes, hydrogen is important, but not from a shipping perspective. Green hydrogen is like gold. If you think that of all hydrogen which is produced, 97% is produced with fossil fuel energy, then you understand what the opportunity is. And that's a big race now. And some ports are definitely making the bet on hydrogen.
Yeah. I think
Green hydrogen.
When you're talking about ports and be mindful for people who are not in the industry, there's a difference between the port and the terminals. The port is normally the governmentally owned institution, and the terminal is often private, and there can be multiple terminals in a port. And it's actually the area where I do see collaboration being born. So speaking specifically for the Nordic countries, there's actually a very good collaboration between the Port Authority and the port community with us, and even across port authorities. So there's a knowledge network between the Port of Gothenburg and the Port of Aarhus, where the terminal acts as a link. So to answer the question on whether it's everyone for their own, we are seeing some progress there.
I don't believe that everyone is for their own. I see more and more collaboration in recent years. And although there is a lot of competition, supply chain is a very fragmented structure, and each player depends on the other. So decarbonization is a team play.
So we're short on time. Let me just skim through the next set of questions, and then we can discuss them quickly and give our closing remarks. So the first one is, how do blockchains and new technologies come into play with, let's say, probably supporting sustainability in supply chains? The next question is, we do have to think collectively, I agree. However, if we haven't been able to think collectively during a global pandemic, which was arguably a much more pressing in 2020 and 2021 than climate change is today, how can we expect countries to act collectively when it comes to climate change, decarbonization, sustainable supply chains? And finally, on which topic do you find more pressing, supply chain resilience, preventing disruptions, or addressing climate change, which is easier to implement as well? So we can start with the topic of new tech, and Josue, if you would like to lead on that.
Well, there's been a lot of discussion on the blockchain, and actually what exactly does that mean, right, for the supply chain? The way that I see it is probably more into the digitalization that at the beginning we were discussing. Is more about providing systems that will create visibility. But again, the visibility is not done just because of a lack of a system. It's done because of a lack of willingness to collaborate most of the time. So there should be a willingness. There should be also a matching with the processes. There should be also, sharing information in certain frequencies, and then having systems that will be supporting this. I believe this is a key role for everything that I've said before regarding the transparency and identifying vulnerabilities and hotspots, and at the same time understanding and sharing responsibility in this sustainable supply chain strategies. The systems are key. I wouldn't just say the role of blockchain, but I will say in general all digitalization and using that information in real time and making better decisions with that information as well. So that will probably be my take on this. Now that I'm saying this, I would like, of course, to just, the last question is, saying the resilience. I'm sorry, but it made me laugh a lot. The fact that, which one is harder or not, like you probably pick the most difficult ones in the whole field. First, with all the disruptions, the question suggests that there is a way to predict the disruptions. which I believe is already clear that we do not predict the disruptions. The disruptions are going to occur. We don't know when. And in my view, it will be not very smart to target the efforts in trying to prevent them, but instead to have in place a real strategy for that. And I believe you Wolf, and you were a CEO, you were discussing about it, so you probably can also give some takes. In my view, it's always a challenge that by preparing that something may happen, you prepare a strategy with backup facilities, inventory, and contracts to make sure that you can respond fast in case of a disruption. But then again, after 2 years that the disruption is gone, everybody forgets, in my view. Companies start focusing again in minimization of cost, because at the end, nobody gets credit for solving problems that didn't happen, right? And I believe that's probably one of the main challenges in risk. And in sustainability, I will say probably is the one that seems to have more potential in more, how to say it, clear gains when you are observing also the role that has in the way that companies operate and opportunities to also become the company that you will be gaining the market, which I believe also one of the main drivers for Maersk to go towards these initiatives. But those will be my comments for the questions.
Thank you, Sway. So as a respect for everyone's time, I'd like to conclude this session with saying first, thank you to all the speakers. Really appreciate having you. And thank you to all the attendees. We now have our first Tech Talk session with Hazem Zariqat at the Tech Talk. Just move on to the other panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for everything that I've said before regarding the transparency and identifying vulnerabilities and hotspots, and at the same time understanding and sharing responsibility in this sustainable supply chain strategies. The systems are key. I wouldn't just say the role of blockchain, but I will say in general all digitalization and using that information in real time and making better decisions with that information as well. So that will probably be my take on this. Now that I'm saying this, I would like, of course, to just, the last question is, saying the resilience. I'm sorry, but it made me laugh a lot. The fact that, which one is harder or not, like you probably pick the most difficult ones in the whole field. First, with all the disruptions, the question suggests that there is a way to predict the disruptions, which I believe is already clear that we do not predict the disruptions. The disruptions are going to occur. We don't know when. And in my view, it will be not very smart to target the efforts in trying to prevent them, but instead to have in place a real strategy for that. And I believe you Wolf, and you were a CEO, you were discussing about it, so you probably can also give some takes. In my view, it's always a challenge that by preparing that something may happen, you prepare a strategy with backup facilities, inventory, and contracts to make sure that you can respond fast in case of a disruption. But then again, after 2 years that the disruption is gone, everybody forgets, in my view. Companies start focusing again in minimization of cost, because at the end, nobody gets credit for solving problems that didn't happen, right? And I believe that's probably one of the main challenges in risk. And in sustainability, I will say probably is the one that seems to have more potential in more, how to say it, clear gains when you are observing also the role that has in the way that companies operate and opportunities to also become the company that you will be gaining the market, which I believe also one of the main drivers for Maersk to go towards these initiatives. But those will be my comments for the questions.
Thank you, Sway. So as a respect for everyone's time, I'd like to conclude this session with saying first, thank you to all the speakers. Really appreciate having you.